The Meters are an American funk band who were formed in New Orleans in 1965. They've had three stints of existence so far, 1965 to 77, 1989 to 2018, and from 2020 and are still going. They've also used the names The Original Meters, The Funky Meters, and The Meter Men. Mostly they've been led by Art Neville and included for a while Cyril Neville, both of whom at other times were members of the Neville Brothers. They are regarded as a foundational funk band and they have released 8 albums, all of which were in their first stint of existence. So that's the 1965 to 77 period. Hi, my name is Dan, and this is a review of the album Look Ka Pai Pai by The Meters. It was released in 1970. It was their second studio album, and it's my first time listening to it. I reviewed another of their albums, Rejuvenation, a couple of years ago, and I loved it. So let's see what I think of this one. So I would describe this as being mostly instrumental funk. The only bits of vocals that I remember jumping out at me are in the title track Look That Pie Pie. I think the rest of it is all instrumental. It's whilst we're doing kind of technical stuff, it was produced by a guy called Alan Toussaint, who I've heard of, is a legendary New Orleans producer. The instruments here are organ, drums, bass, and guitar, and it feels very much like the organ is the leader here, and that it's based around. I strongly got the impression that actually the guy on the organ, Mr. Neville, wrote the tracks by playing them on the organ on his own, and then the other stuff was added later. I might be wrong with that, but it's the organ seems to be central here. And in terms of it being funk, so I don't think it's hugely controversial to call it funk, but I also don't think it's necessarily controversial to say that it's not as funky as some funk. And I think that in some ways it's more R&B, or it's kind of, if this is funk and this is R&B, it's in the middle here. It's straddling this between the two. And one of the reasons I'm going to say that is because, or that I am saying this is, as I thought about this idea as I was listening, I wondered about what it would be like if there were vocals on top. And I felt like if there were vocals, it might feel more soul, depending on how the vocals were approached. Now, I think it might, obviously, this depends on where you say the boundary the funk is. And I think that when you get to stuff like P-Funk, Parliament, and Funkadelic, that has moved on quite a bit from stuff like this. But when you start at the starting of funk, people like James Brown, this isn't too different from that, I would say. But it's got quite a lot of chord changes and it's got quite a lot of riffs and stuff going on. It doesn't quite have all the time this kind of continuity and groove that funk has. The drumming is particularly nice. The bass is reasonable, but you need to listen on a decent system. Otherwise, because the bass is quite bottomy, it can get lost. So if you're listening on a little Bluetooth speaker or laptop speakers, you might get completely lost. So it's worth listening to it with something that has some depth. And it's okay. But for a funk album, it's had a fairly muted response from me. And I think it's because I wished it was funkier. And maybe I was just disappointed that it wasn't as funky as I like my funk. So it didn't quite hit the spot for me. So don't get me wrong, it's decent. But when I started to, in my head, compare it with other funk, it feels a bit pedestrian. And it feels, I think maybe that's an association with the organ. The idea that sometimes so organ-based stuff can be a bit kind of Murph and the Magic tones and kind of easy listening things, and it felt a little bit it was going down that road. Funky Miracle, the track is better than some of the others, but overall, it was okay, but I was mildly disappointed, I'm afraid. Maybe it just needs a singer. It put James Brown in front of this, and this could be a pretty decent album, I would say. So maybe it just hasn't enough going for it just through the organ. which is what is the hero here. I'm going to draw this to a close. That's what I think of the album. I'd love to know what you think, but please let me know by leaving a comment. But that's it from me for now.